And just about then, some UFOs crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. In my early days in this business, the first question people would answer me is, do you know about Roswell? And I was pleased to be able to say that I had some small inkling of what had happened there. It was on Tuesday, July the 8th, 1947, at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, that Colonel William Blanchard, commander of the Roswell Army Airfield, put out a press release saying that they had recovered a flying disc. And this was reported in the local papers. That was the truth. Hours later, Brigadier General Roger Ramey said, no, that was a mistake. It wasn't a disc, it was a Rowan weather balloon. And that was a lie. It was not only a lie, and incidentally, I don't think the Brigadier General did it on his own. I think he had been ordered to do it. I read something recently that his wife was very distressed, and he was too, at having to make that decision. But it was the cornerstone lie in what has become a culture of untruths and disinformation. Well, then, as you know, President Truman established MJ-12 with virtually dictatorial powers in respect of UFOs and the ET file. They passed the National Security Act with its provision of right to know, which I really didn't take as seriously for quite a long while as I do now. I think it has been used to screen a lot of people who might otherwise have been in the loop, and to make it very difficult to really find out exactly what has been going on. Meanwhile, the group that was back engineering one of the vehicles captured at Roswell moved to Nevada and set up operations there. And of course, they were secret operations. And when General Eisenhower wanted to know what was going on, they refused to tell him. And would you be surprised to know that that didn't please the general? After all, he was the President of the United States and had been the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, and to have troops allegedly under his command not telling him what was going on, I think rubbed him the wrong way. So he threatened to send in the First Army from Colorado, and that got their attention. And so they allowed him to send, I think it was 3 or 4, I can't remember which, of his close friends from the CIA to go out and take a look around at, I guess, both Area 51 and S4. And they reported back exactly what was expected, and that was that they were back engineering one of the craft that had crashed near Roswell.
All right, so I wanted to stop the video right there and talk a little bit about what Paul Haley had said about the government denying that a alien craft had crashed in Roswell, New Mexico, and it was just a weather balloon. So, what I want to provide some insight and maybe some common sense thought that nobody had ever thought of before to add into that. That, you know, nobody ever thinks of everything, and that's what my show does. Is it provides a different view, more of a common sense view to different conspiracy theories or different government secrets. So the first thing I want to start with is I have 2 screens set up here, so I have to look over. All right, so I'm hoping my video don't lag behind on me, which it looks like it's doing in the first place. So, anyway, so let's go back to when Roswell happened. So that was 1947. So Roswell happened in 1947, and let's look at what else happened in 1947. If you look at my other screen, if you could see it, let me blow it up a little. In 1947, the government enacted the National Security Act. The National Security Act of 1947 mandated a major reorganization of the foreign policy and military establishments of the U.S. government. The act created many of the institutions that presidents found useful when formulating and implementing foreign policy, including the National Security Council. So, who does the National Security Council include? The council itself includes the president, vice president, secretary of state, secretary of defense, and other members such as the director of the CIA, who meet at the White House to discuss both long-term problems and more immediate national security crises. What the act also says, it also gives a referendum to what the people should about the citizens and what information that can be given to them. It's called the right to know. So after Roswell, they enacted that. It gave the people right to know because majority of the time, people would just, at that time, they would just come out and say stuff. And as you heard Paul Haley say, which is factual, is that General Rainey had first reported that there was that they were in fact in possession of an alien craft with alien bodies. So a couple hours later, General Rainey redacted that statement saying it was a weather balloon, which, as you saw on the pictures or on the video, during the video, I showed you those pictures. And the one picture was of the wreckage from that was taken, and then the other one was of soldiers holding up what seemed to be Mylar at the time. So next, what happened at that same time? So what happened around there? So what also happened around there was a few years later in 1955. Dwight Eisenhower started the space administration, NASA. So, isn't that a little odd that he would start the space administration a little under 10 years after Roswell? The fact is that they had already been talking about space prior to then. A reference goes back all the way to right after Roswell, 1948, 1949, and actually in 1953, Eisenhower had started talking about going to space and started talking about creating a institution, if you will, to look over at all that. So he, in the preamble of the act, it says, an act to provide for research into problems of flight within and outside the Earth's atmosphere and for other purposes. The government's always been vague about what other purposes. Even now, the government still uses that phrase, other purposes. Even in 2018, if you look at some of the bills that are passed and some of the executive orders that are passed, it still says other purposes. So, like I said, during the late 1940s, the Department of Defense pursued research in rocketry and upper atmospheric sciences as means of assuring American leadership in technology. We didn't have, if they're talking about rocket technology, yeah, we had a little rocket technology back then, but it wasn't being used to go to space. So that's going to lead us straight back to what type of technology did we have at the time. If you listen to Paul Haley, he had what he had said about the president sending three members of the CIA to Area 51, and what information he brought back was they were reverse engineering the alien spacecraft that they had found, but they didn't have. So here is a timeline of what technology advanced after the 1950s, or after Roswell. And a certain specific technology advanced after that. Mainly electronic and computer technology advanced after that. You know, even before then, if you take a look at the technologies that advanced prior to that, take for instance the Industrial Revolution. Human beings have been around for thousands and thousands of years. And we were intelligent human beings at that time, even thousands of years. So in the 1830s, we were still in the Industrial Revolution. You know, we had just created a steam engine. We had just created, trains and all that. We had just created all that just then. To me, humans are behind in technology. We should be, based on how the government puts it or how history puts it, we should be far more advanced than what we are. So back to the timeline, if you look at the timeline and what was invented during the 1940s and 1950s, if you look at that, the black box for a airplane, transistors, first video recorder, television, fiber optics, integrated circuit, lasers, satellite, the first satellite in 1957, computer hard disk, 3D, hovercrafts, microchips. That's why I said after Roswell, a certain type of technology it just exploded after Roswell. Prior to then, we didn't have motherboard technology then. But the only time we had motherboard technology was after Roswell. Is that a coincidence? Based on how long humans have been around, they didn't advance very far in technology at all. Not at all. And then an alien crashes and boom. I have the ability to talk to you through wireless communication and on a TV screen. So, after that, NASA was created. Coincidence? All this happened in a short span of maybe 15 years, a lot of it less than 10 years after the crash. Is all that a coincidence? That's too much of a coincidence. All that stuff to happen in 10 years when human beings hadn't advanced hardly at all from rock to steel to a steam engine. There's not much history there in the advancements of technology. You know, and prior to the 1700s, we only had windmills. We barely had wind power. Water mills, we barely, we had that. But all of a sudden, an explosion to a brand new type of technology. And then on top of that, we're going to space all of a sudden. We have a need to leave the planet. Back then, people would have thought you were crazy. If you said, I'm going to leave the planet and I want to go to another planet. People thought Aristotle was crazy. People thought Einstein was crazy. Let alone a president come out and say, I'm going to make an administration or a certain department so we can go to space. We can explore space. Why the sudden urge to explore space? Why? Why the sudden surge in a certain type of technology? Why the sudden urge to go to space? Why, after 10,000 and thousands of years of human beings being on this planet, did all of a sudden technology explode the way it did right after Roswell? So that's what I wanted to add in there. And I want to let you all get back to watching the rest of the video. So, because there's a lot of stuff I'm gonna add at the end of the video that goes, because you are in for a good little bit of information from Paul Haley at the end of this video. So enjoy it, and hopefully your jaws haven't dropped when he starts saying it. By the way, Paul Haley is legit. He is legit. He is the prime minister, the defense minister for Canada. He is also a permanent member of Canadian Parliament. He has worked in the government field all his life. Transportation department. He is about 80 something years old now, I think, 90 maybe. And for him to come out and say that aliens exist, I believe him. I mean, why would you not believe an 80-year-old man? What does he have to gain? Nothing. He doesn't have anything to gain. He's got all the money he could probably ever want. I mean, he worked for the government. He's still got a good income coming in. It's not like he needs to make any money. So anyway, like I said, finish watching the video, and I'll get back with you after you finish listening to it. All right?
Now, an issue that concerned me when I went public in 2005 has come true. I was afraid that we might have the United States Air Force tackling some ships from outside the planet, and that wasn't possible for years because we didn't have the technology. But now they do, and they're starting to shoot down alien ships, and we don't know whose, and we don't know what the likely consequences are. And so we must sign the treaty on the prevention of the placement of weapons in outer space. This treaty is the most important document of our time. And two things are paramount. The U.S. must recognize that war is obsolete. It can't be fought, not successfully.
Today we're taking a crucial step to secure America's future in space by reviving the National Space Council. And space exploration is not only essential to our character as a nation, but also our economy and our great nation's security. Providing the space security we need to protect the American people, and security is going to be a very big factor with respect to space and space exploration. The Vice President will serve as the Council's chair. Several representatives of my administration will join him, including Secretaries of State, Defense, Homeland Security, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the National Security Advisor, NASA, and the Director of National Intelligence. The Council will also draw the expertise of other White House offices as well as insights from scientists, innovators, and business leaders from across the country. We have many business leaders that want to be a big part of this. I think the privatization of certain aspects is going to play a very crucial role, don't you think? They are, and the Vice President, myself, and a few others are going to pick some private people to be on the board. Sometimes you have to view things from a distance in order to see the real truth. Thank you all very much. Very importantly, I'm hereby directing the Department of Defense and Pentagon to immediately begin the process necessary to establish a Space Force as the sixth branch of the armed forces. That's a big statement. 1 year ago, I revived the National Space Council and put exactly the right man in charge, and that's our friend, Mike Pence, who feels very strongly about this. And in December, I signed a historic directive that will return Americans to the moon for the first time since 1972, if you can believe that. Always remembering it's about that, but it's also about jobs and the economy. This is a great thing we're doing. This time we will do more than plant our flag and leave our footprints. We will establish a long-term presence, expand our economy, and build the foundation for an eventual mission to Mars, which is actually going to happen very quickly.
At President Trump's direction, we are taking steps to establish the United States Space Force as the sixth branch of our military.
This administration has made it a top priority to confront the emerging security challenges we face in space. And if we do our job well, our graduates will be able to launch the kinds of ideas that might preclude the need to launch ordnance.
Our Commander-in-Chief's highest priority is the safety and security of the American people. That space is a warfighting domain. And under the President's new National Space Strategy, our administration is uniting America's military, commercial, and civil space sectors as never before. We also will ensure that our men and women in uniform can wield these capabilities unencumbered by bureaucracy. And under the leadership of our Commander-in-Chief, we've already removed unnecessary restraints on our commanders and given them rules of engagement they need to confront emerging threats on land. And toward that end, the National Space Council will work with the National Security Council to conduct a comprehensive review of current and future space operational authorities to ensure that our warfighters have the freedom and flexibility they need to deter and defeat any threat to our security in the rapidly evolving battlefield of space.
Okay, so I wanted to stop the video right there to talk about what the Honorable Paul HELLYER said about the United States government fighting aliens in space. What proof do we have in what Paul HELLYER says is true? What proof do we have? Well, starting with what Trump has put out about a space council and a space force and what we are going to do with it. So like I said, what proof do we have that Paul HELLYER is correct? So on my other screen over here, you can see it up on that screen. I'm going to start off with the end of the NASA space program. So NASA ended its space program in 2011. The reason they ended the program was said that so NASA can concentrate on going to Mars and putting a human being on Mars while also putting a base on the moon, which is something that I mean it's possible that we are doing that, but why are they in such a hurry to make a space force by the year 2020? I know that's probably not a realistic outlook on a full space force. However, it is a realistic outlook for the Air Force to have a command by then. So in up to 2014, space travel by way of commercial and or private use has been mostly illegal, mostly by NASA. NASA's reasoning for it to be illegal, nobody knows. Now, up until 2016, the FAA would not issue you a license for space travel. So why all of a sudden do they want to issue licenses to go to space? Why do they all of a sudden want commercial and private use of space? So when the governments, our governments first started out, they couldn't afford to go to war. They didn't have the resources to go to war. They couldn't make their own ammunition. They couldn't make their own tanks. They couldn't make their own planes and still function as a military at the same time they were going to war. That means that they would have their military split up, and they couldn't do that. So as Mike Pence put it in the video, legalizing space travel for citizens and commercial use will be economically beneficial. Well, that's true, but 9 times out of 10, the reason they really need to do that is because they really need help. They need subcontractors just like they do during wartime. So what exactly does that mean? Well, if you haven't noticed, the only times the government starts subcontracting out their parts or their necessities is during times of war. Just like Vice President Pence said, it makes economical sense. It kind of does, but that's kind of their go-to for it. But they need more people to work on what they need. They need more people to work on military aircraft. They need more people to work on advanced weaponry. I mean, when you're out fighting somewhere, you need the best weaponry you can get. So if you're out in space trying to fight somebody or something, you're going to need your military out there. Just like they thought back in World War I, they want their military fighting. They don't need half of their military split up. One side engineering something and making ammunition while the other half fights, when you can have everybody there. And seeing how going to space was illegal for businesses and your average citizen, they needed a way to commercialize the making of weaponry and space aircraft. Well, the only way to do that is to legalize going to space. It's been illegal for the last 80 years.
And now they make a Space Force, and then only when they make a Space Force for outer space do they want to legalize privatization and commercialization of space travel. So up until 2014, space travel was strictly limited to NASA and the government. Now, the FAA still would not give out licenses to commercial or private citizens and or businesses in order to launch anything or anyone into space until 2016, which is the year that our president, our newest president, Donald Trump, was elected, and he started the Space Force and brought back the Space Council. So only then was it allowed to be legalized. So what part of the government is the Space Force or the National Space Command going to be part of? Well, the National Space Command is already a part of NORAD. It's also a part of the U.S. Canadian North American Aerospace Defense. As you heard from Paul HELLYER, he was part of that. He was part of NORAD and the tracking of everything in the United States, North America, Canada, and in space. He was part of that tracking agenda that they had and tracking control that they had in NORAD. So he's been part of that for a long time. Not to mention in Trump's speech, he also stated that the Department of Defense would be handling it, the Space Command will be handling it, which is the main department within NORAD in Cheyenne Mountain. And the fact that we're making a Space Force and or a National Space Command just a few years after Paul HELLYER stated that we or our government were fighting aliens in space. What kind of coincidence is that? Let's listen to how many people of each administration and how many presidents have talked about aliens or UFOs. And one in particular, with Barack Obama, he just has a look on him after he talks about it that's just, you'll never forget it. I'll say that.
If suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe, we'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries, and we would find out once and for all that we really are all human beings here on this earth together. Well, I don't suppose we can wait for some alien race to come down and threaten us. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war? I think maybe I'd answer it this way. I keep, in my frustration sometimes, you know, actually, if you count some of the things going on in smaller countries and all, there have been about 114 wars since World War II. But I've often wondered, what if all of us in the world discovered that we were threatened by a power from outer space, from another planet?
Do you believe that aliens are out there? Well, if so, you're not alone. Bill Clinton seems to think they could be real. The former president recently appeared on Jimmy Kimmel Live, and when the topic of extraterrestrial life came up, Clinton noted that he wouldn't be surprised if aliens did in fact exist. Clinton went a little further and cited the absolutely huge size of the universe and astronomers' back-to-back discoveries of new planets as a reason for his possible belief.
We know from our fancy telescopes that just in the last 2 years, more than 20 planets have been identified outside our solar system that seem to be far enough away from their suns and dense enough that they might be able to support some form of life. So it makes it increasingly less likely that we're alone.
Hi guys, this is Ben Hansen. If you've been following the surge of events where politicians have publicly discussed the UFO and ET topics in the past few years, then you might find this video interesting. Here's a summarized list of some recent events where former Presidents Obama, Bill Clinton, and presidential candidate Hillary Clinton spoke about the UFO subject. It's really quite an unprecedented level of interest shown by our politicians on the topic. It's anybody's guess as to why there's been a sudden increase in discussion. Many people have tried to make predictions as to when and if a disclosure of UFO knowledge was going to come forward. Some predicted that Obama would give UFO disclosure at the end of his term. That didn't obviously happen, but you can't blame people for trying to read the tea leaves when we've had so much political discussion. If you've seen any of the other videos I've produced, we've looked at nonverbal communication and clues that might tell us what, if any, involvement these politicians may be hinting at when they've appeared on TV talk shows. So I have one more video for you before we close the chapter on President Obama's UFO comments. This one kind of snuck under the radar and didn't receive much attention, so you may not have seen it. It comes from a speech Obama made at the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute Awards Gala on September 15, 2016. To my knowledge, this is the last time President Obama made a public statement mentioning the UFO alien topic while in office. Instead of breaking it down for in-depth analysis, I want to try something different this time. I want to allow you, the viewers, to share your own impressions without my initial input. The only thing I want to lay out before playing the video is a reminder of how Obama has treated the subject in the past. If you might remember, a good case was made in one of my other videos that historically, Obama has always treated the UFO subject with levity, somewhat mocking those who asked him about the subjects of Roswell or aliens. It wasn't until his appearance on the Jimmy Kimmel Show in 2015 that I think he really had a moment of seriousness. My conclusion of that interview was that we saw a significant shift in his demeanor and an uncomfortableness demonstrated about the subject. He then went on to make ambiguous and conflicting statements to his previous positions when he appeared on the Ellen DeGeneres Show. Since that time, he still uses humor, but there seems to be something different with how he now handles the subject. Take a look and see what you think. This is right after he lays out the accomplishments of his presidency.
Now, none of this was easy. There were some tough years in there. You had fiscal showdowns and government shutdowns and pandemics and oil spills and pirates. Y'all remember the pirates? I mean, the only thing we haven't had to deal with is like the asteroid, or the aliens. That's true, good point. Shouldn't have mentioned the aliens. But we overcame all that. Shouldn't have mentioned the aliens.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to be joined by my Science and Technology Advisor, Dr. Jack Gibbons, to make a few comments about today's announcement by NASA. This is the product of years of exploration and months of intensive study by some of the world's most distinguished scientists. Like all discoveries, this one will and should continue to be reviewed, examined, and scrutinized. It must be confirmed by other scientists. But clearly, the fact that something of this magnitude is being explored is another vindication of America's space program and our continuing support for it, even in these tough financial times. I am determined that the American space program will put its full intellectual power and technological prowess behind the search for further evidence of life on Mars. First, I have asked Administrator Golden to ensure that this finding is subject to a methodical process of further peer review and validation. Second, I have asked the Vice President to convene at the White House before the end of the year a bipartisan space summit on the future of America's space program. A significant purpose of this summit will be to discuss how America should pursue answers to the scientific questions raised by this finding. Third, we are committed to the aggressive plan we have put in place for robotic exploration of Mars. America's next unmanned mission to Mars is scheduled to lift off from the Kennedy Space Center in November. It will be followed by a second mission in December. I should tell you that the first mission is scheduled to land on Mars on July the 4th, 1997, Independence Day. It is well worth contemplating how we reached this moment of discovery. More than 4 billion years ago, this piece of rock was formed as a part of the original crust of Mars. After billions of years, it broke from the surface and began a 16 million year journey through space that would end here on Earth. It arrived in a meteor shower 13,000 years ago. And in 1984, an American scientist on an annual U.S. government mission to search for meteors on Antarctica picked it up and took it to be studied. Appropriately, it was the first rock to be picked up that year, rock number 84001. Today, rock 84001 speaks to us across all those billions of years and millions of miles. It speaks of the possibility of life. If this discovery is confirmed, it will surely be one of the most stunning insights into our universe that science has ever uncovered. Its implications are as far-reaching and awe-inspiring as can be imagined. Even as it promises answers to some of our oldest questions, it poses still others even more fundamental. We will continue to listen closely to what it has to say as we continue the search for answers and for knowledge that is as old as humanity itself, but essential to our people's future. Thank you.
Out front now, the former Pentagon military official who ran the covert government program up until this last November, Luis Elizondo. Luis, thank you so much for your time tonight. I mean, first, tell us what the purpose of the program was and why it was so secretive.
Sure. The purpose of the program, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, was really designed to do just that. From a national security perspective, identify those things that we see, whether we see them electro-optically, we see them with radar, we see them as eyewitness reports, through a myriad of different ways and avenues that we receive the information, and try to ascertain and determine if that information is a potential threat to national security, in a nutshell. So what did you find? Well, we found a lot. We have identified some very, very interesting, anomalous type of aircraft. Let's call them aircraft. Things that don't have any obvious flight surfaces, any obvious forms of propulsion, and maneuvering in ways that include extreme maneuverability beyond, I would submit, the healthy G-forces of a human or anything biological, hypersonic velocities, low observability, positive lift, again, seemingly in defying the laws of aerodynamics. So people are talking. So do you think, I mean, I know, but do you believe, when you get that Navy pilot saying what he said, do you think that
that was, a UFO? To obviously, I don't have any other word to use, or that, or something else.
Sure, that's a great question. Keeping in mind, it's not just the pilot's testimony on an observation. Sure, when someone comes to you who's in charge of a multi-million-dollar weapon platform, who maintains a top secret security clearance, who is paid and trusted by this country to go fight wars and to fly over cities with live munitions, and by the way, they're trained observers with millions of dollars invested in their training, I would submit to you it's pretty compelling. But on top of that, it's not just the eyewitness testimony. It is actual electro-optical data and radar returns. It's also people like radar operators and air traffic controllers. So I think the discussion should be maybe a little bit broader than that. I think people are focusing just on 2 videos coming from a set of F-18s when really it's a lot more than that.
So recently, I guess it was in October, astronomers spotted what they say could be the first interstellar asteroid. You see it there, kind of that strange shape from beyond the solar system. What do you see when you look at that?
Well, Ms. Burnett, I have to admit to you, when I ran this program, I was fundamentally looking at, my colleagues looking at 2 things.
Yeah.
What is it and how does it work? We have deliberately stayed away from going down the rabbit hole of who's behind the wheel and what are their intentions.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people have a lot of feelings towards that and are very emotional about that. And what I wanted to do was to allow the data to speak for itself and then use that data to inform leadership, senior DoD leadership, about the potential threat that these type of technologies pose to national security, especially over any type of controlled airspace that we might have. So I'm not trying to be evasive in any way or vague with your answer, but
yeah. Well,
I think there's a lot of possibilities.
Look, and I know you think it's important. I know you think that the government didn't take the threat seriously enough. So let me just ask you point blank the question. Do you believe that life from somewhere else, while you ran this program, came here, visited, observed?
I will tell you unequivocally that through the observation, scientific methodologies that were applied to look at this phenomena, that these aircraft, we'll call them aircraft, are displaying characteristics that are not currently within the U.S. inventory, nor in any foreign inventory that we are aware of.
So I know you're being clear, but I mean, the answer is yes.
I can't speak on behalf of the government. Obviously, I'm not in the U.S. government anymore. My personal belief is that there is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
That's right.
When we had your husband, President Clinton, on this show, he said, I asked him about UFOs in Area 51 and if he looked in, because if I was president, that's the first thing I do. I go right into those files and see what was going on.
Right.
And he said that he did do that.
Yes.
And that he didn't find anything.
Well, I'm gonna do it again.
Yeah, why not?
Right? And there's a new name. It's unexplained aerial phenomenon.
Unexplained aerial phenomenon,
Yep,
really?
Yep, UAP. That's the latest nomenclature.
I like the old one. I like UFO. I don't know why.
Well, I think we can use them interchangeably, but I would like us to go into those files and hopefully make as much of that public as possible. If there's nothing there, let's tell people there's nothing there.
What if there is something there?
Well, if there is something there, unless it's a threat to national security, I think we ought to share it with the public.
Well, what if everybody's all hopped up on medical marijuana and everybody gets paranoid? I would love it.
That's why I want more research.
If you share it with me, I'll decide what is the best course of action. I really have my ear to the ground.
Well, I'm more than happy to do that.
So, after my video, what do you think about UFOs, aliens, and the reason why we have the Space Force? Those faces from Obama and the face from Hillary Clinton. I mean, if that didn't rack your brain about whether Paul was correct on what he said about the government fighting aliens or that the alien race exists, I'll leave that up to you. So like, comment, subscribe if you want to see more.